MCQ 38, we're going to take a look at the factors that can actually act as forces of natural selection. So, as a little bit of a summary process, there are quite a few number of processes that can eventually lead towards natural selection. In the eyes of the species that we're trying to investigate for natural selection, the species will undergo varied form of reproduction. So for the ease and the simplicity of this discussion, I'll just have them go through sexual reproduction. So this will generate a reservoir of offspring. So you can think of them as offspring that's in a pool over here. So this is a reservoir of genetically varied offspring. So the next factor here will be with regards towards the environment. Let me just box it out for the species. For the case of the environment, it changes on an unpredictable basis. It could be frequent, it could be infrequent. So the changes in that will actually give rise to this pressure known as selection pressure. So the climate could become warmer, there could be more predator, there could be more prey, there could be less of this and that. So selection pressure could either come in the form of abiotic factors, which are non-living factors, or biotic factors, like prey as well as predator. It will actually then act on this pool of genetically varied offspring. So offspring themselves that actually give rise to that of a selection advantage must have been offspring that has the phenotype that gives them an advantage in the current selection pressure. They will ultimately undergo the process of natural selection. They are being selected. But for offspring that at that juncture over there has a selective disadvantage, they do not possess traits that are advantageous according to the current selection pressure. They will not undergo natural selection, and as a result of that, they will actually be eradicated from gene pool. They're not going to be in the gene pool anymore. So in the next generation, less of that disadvantageous gene could be passed on towards the further generations of offspring. So the question here, we're looking for factors that can really give rise to our selection pressure changes. All this must have been inherited from the environment. So competition of nutrients, this is natural. Alright, disease, food supply and predation. You can see that food supply and predation itself, they are considered to be biotic factors. Competition by other organisms could also be considered as a biotic factor. And for the case of disease, it could come in two forms, either biotic or abiotic, really dependent on what was the disease-causing agent. Was it that the external environment, the conditions like the soil, like the pH, like the temperature has changed so much so that it actually encouraged disease formation that's abiotic? Or could there be a parasitic flea? Could there be bacteria and viruses or pathogen that causes a species to be susceptible to diseases? So actually all of them are considered to be forces that are considered to be part of natural selection. Now, we do not mistake that for human intervention. If let's say human was one of the pointer, we're not going to choose them because human don't actually act as forces for natural selection, but rather they act as forces for artificial selection. Just going on a tangent here, artificial selection that is initiated by human as well as natural selection that is initiated by the environment itself. Ultimately, these two combination forces of natural selection as well as artificial selection, you can see that in this overlapping field over here, this actually represents evolution in the long run for a species. So it's actually really advantageous to go for sexual reproduction because you increase the amount of variability in the gene pool of your species to adapt to varying selection pressure, either from human or whether is it from the nature. So the correct answer for this question here, once again, is D. All of them are environmental factors.